Hello again, grade 10. Let us proceed in discussing the technical terms used in research. Last time we already talked about the chapter 1 and the RRLs. Now let's proceed in talking about the methodology in research. So what is methodology in a study? It discusses the process or method the research study was done or completed. It tells the main instrument used in gathering of data, survey form, research made questionnaire, interview, and etc. So basically, this chapter in the research talked about how the research was done or how what are the processes or method that you used in conducting the research. There are parts of methodology. Let's first have the research design refers to the overall strategy that you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring you will effectively address the research problem. It constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. So when we say research design, this is what you choose, whether it is qualitative or quantitative. How do you want your research to be conducted? So how to write a research design? First, identify the type of research design. So there are three umbrella terms of research design. And we have the quantitative, the qualitative, and the mixed method. But we will focus more on the qualitative and the quantitative. So specify whether your study is experimental, correlational, that's under the quantitative. And we also have the descriptive or phenomenological research design. So, and there are many other design that you can choose in writing your research. But the basic four are the correlational, the the descriptive, the phenomenological, or that's three, and just use that in creating your research. Next is justify your choice. Explain why this design is suitable for your research objectives. You must ensure that your research design is aligned on your topic. Example, your title is The Effects of Sleep Deprivation to Academic Performance. So you cannot use a qualitative descriptive design in there. You have to use the quantitative correlational. So, because you want to discover its relationship. So explain why this design is suitable on your research objectives. So your objectives and design must be aligned. Next is outline procedures. Detail the steps you will take to carry out the research, including how you will control variables and ensure validity. So that's how you write the research design. Let's have an example. Example, a descriptive research design was used to understand the study habits of grade 10 students in Davao City. This approach helped in collecting detailed information without changing any conditions. It's descriptive because it's qualitative approach where it just want to understand study habits. So it just wants to describe the study habits of grade 10. So that's the research design. Next in methodology is the research local. This is very easy. It just refers to the place where the research was conducted. Where will you conduct your research? So how to write it? Describe the setting, provide details about the location, including geographical, cultural, or institutional context, and explain the relevance. Discuss why the setting is appropriate for your study. Here is an example of a research local. So the study was conducted at Maan National High School in Davao City. That's the place. And why do you choose it? The school was chosen because it has a large population. So that's just basically research local. Where will you conduct your study and why do you choose that local? Next, we have the research respondents or research participants. In the quantitative, we call them respondents, and in qualitative, we call them participants. So it tells who the group of individuals are used in the research study. So how to write it? So define the population, describe the broader group your participants represent, and specify selection criteria, explain how participants were chosen, including inclusion and exclusion criteria. So in here, you can include also the sampling design on how you choose your participants. And detail sampling methods. State whether you use random sampling, convenience sampling, or another method. So, in qualitative, most sampling method that we use are the purposive sampling, but when in quantitative, we use the random sampling. So, just research on what is applicable on your study. Here is an example. So participants included 150 undergraduate students aged 18 to 24. So you have to state the specifics. So there are 18 to 24 years old and selected through, how do you select them? Through stratified random sampling. And why do you choose that sampling method? So to ensure representation across all academic disciplines. So that's the research respondents. In other research format, the sampling design and the research respondents are separated. But you can also just merge it as long as you describe who your respondents are and how do you select them, what sampling design you use. Next, we have the role of the researcher. This is often used in the qualitative study. So, the primary role of the researcher is to safeguard the participants and their data. Mechanisms for such safeguarding must be clearly articulated to participants before the research begins. So, you highlight in your study what is your role as a researcher. Know how to write it. Clarify your position. State your relationship to the study setting or participants. Acknowledge biases. Discuss any personal biases and how you mitigate them. And describe your actions. Detail your role in data collection and analysis. Okay, let's have an example to clearly understand it. Here is an example. As a researcher, I ensure the students answer the survey voluntarily and their responses remained private. Participants were informed about the purpose of the study before they answered the survey. So this is what you do as a researcher, and you mitigate the biases. So you ensure that the respondents are private and the participants were informed on the purpose of the study. So you just state what is your role as a researcher in your data collection. Next, we have the research instruments. So these are the measurement tools you use in gathering your data. So examples, we have questionnaires, or scales, or the Likert scales, the checklists that have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's Likert scales, designed to obtain data on a topic of interest from research subjects. It tells the main instrument used in gathering of data. So this is usually used in quantitative. And for qualitative, there are just interview guide questions. So those are the basic instruments we use in qualitative, and for quantitative we use survey or checklist. So how to write your research instruments. So describe each instrument. Provide details about the format, number of items, and scales used. So you describe what kind of instrument you use. If it is survey, so how many items it is, or what scales do you use? Is it Likert or just the checklist? Establish validity and reliability. Explain how the instruments were tested or validated. Include samples. Attach copies or examples in the appendix if possible. So in your in the whole paper of your research, you must attach in the appendices your sample interview guide question or your sample survey. Here is an example of the research instrument. So a researcher-made questionnaire was used to gather data. It included questions about students, study habits, time management, and preferred learning methods. Here you just describe what instruments you use. Do you use a questionnaire, and what are the questions in there? So that's research instrument. Next, we have the data gathering procedure and data collection. So you already know what are the instruments you use, who are your participants. Now, how do you gather your data? So this is just the process of conducting the research, a step-by-step process. So the usual steps in data gathering are permission to conduct the study, administration and retrieval of the questionnaires, tabulation of data gathered, and etc. So you just have to enumerate what are your processes to collect the data. So first, permission was requested from the school principal to conduct the survey. Then after approval, questionnaires were distributed to grade 10 students during their break time. So the completed surveys were collected after 30 minutes. So you have to indicate the processes of your data collection. Okay. Next is we have the data analysis. So in methodology, it refers to the process of systematically examining, organizing, interpreting, and presenting data collected during research. It involves applying statistical or logical techniques to summarize the data, identify patterns, and draw meaningful collections. So in the methodology part, you just have to state how will you analyze the data. There are types of data analysis and methodology. First is in the qualitative and data analysis, which are used for non-numerical data. The common methods include thematic analysis, content analysis, and narrative analysis. And for the quantitative data analysis, the common methods are descriptive statistics, when you want to get the mean, median, and frequency, and we have the inferential statistics and the correlation analysis. How to write the data analysis. First, explain the data, how the data was organized. Mention if you check for completeness or remove incomplete responses. Describe the method used. State whether you use statistical tools, qualitative coding, or thematic analysis. And mention any software or tools used. If applicable, note if software like Excel or SPSS was used. This is usually applicable for the quantitative research. And next is explain how the results will be interpreted. Mention if the data will be presented using graphs, tables, or descriptions. So basically, it's just a process of how you will analyze the data you collected. Here is an example of a data analysis. So after collecting survey responses from grade 10 students, The data was reviewed for completeness. Incomplete surveys were set aside, the responses were then grouped based on common answers and converted into percentages to identify the most common study habits. And this can also be termed as the data were analyzed through thematic analysis. So bar graphs and tables were used to present the findings clearly. So you just have to state how will you analyze the collected data. Next is we have the statistical tools or treatment. So these are applicable on the quantitative research. These are methods involved in carrying out a study which include planning, designing, collecting data, drawing meaningful interpretation, and reporting of the findings. So it indicates the statistical method used or utilized in the study. Example, you use the mean, t-test, standard deviation, Pearson, regression, and etc. So this is only used in the quantitative research. So if you use the qualitative research design, so this is not applicable. Now, how to write the statistical treatment? So identify statistical test. What test will you use? Specify it. Example, you use the ANOVA, and also justify choices. Explain why these tests were appropriate for your data. Example, your statistical test is correlational. So explain why. Why is it appropriate? Example. So the study used the mean formula to determine the most common study habits among students. Data was also presented in percentage form for easy understanding. So since it determines most common study habits among students, so you use the mean formula. So that's it for the methodology part, and I hope you understood how to write those parts, and you are now ready to write your chapter 3 of your research. Thank you and see you in our next lesson.